Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Mariela Colon, and I'm with the Adult Services Department at the Chicago Public Library. Tonight's virtual program is another in our ongoing series of literary, cultural, and civic engagement, and in celebration of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Today's event is additionally part of our Voices for Justice series, which seeks to highlight author, thought leaders who can spark conversations in the area of social justice. During tonight's program, we'll be monitoring an online chat for questions from the audience for a brief Q&A following the conversation. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the evening, journalist Monica Eng. Monica Eng is a reporter for Axios Chicago, where she reports on food, health, cultural, politics, environmental issues, and more. Before going to Axios in 2021, she worked at WBEZ, the Sun-Times, and the Chicago Tribune, where she spent 16 years editing and reporting on food, culture, and health. Monica has won multiple writing awards and has been nominated for the James Beard Award 5 times. Monica is a fourth-generation Chicagoan whose great-grandfather came to Chicago from China in 1911. Her children are fourth-generation Chicago Public School graduates. I want to thank her for leading the discussion with tonight's keynote speaker, Qian Julie Wang. A reminder before I turn it over, we want to welcome your questions throughout tonight's program, so please feel free to place them both in the Facebook or YouTube comments, and we will pass them on to our speaker. With that, I'll hand it off to Monica.
Thanks so much, Mariela, for that lovely introduction. I am so excited to be here today. I have been enjoying this book so much. So without further ado, I'd like to say that Qian Julie Wang is a litigator and the author of Beautiful Country. Beautiful Country was released in 2021 and became an instant New York Times bestseller. Called an essential book for our times, it was one of the New York Times Book Review's notable books of 2021. This memoir is a poignant and heartrending tale of Qian Julie's journey from China to Brooklyn, where at age 7, she went from being the daughter of professors to hiding in the shadows as an undocumented immigrant. With an open heart and a strong passion for supporting marginalized communities, Qian Julie uses her literary gifts to illuminate the world of law, finance, culture, civil rights, and politics through touching human stories. Welcome, and I can't wait to talk to you, Qian Julie.
Thank you so much for having me, Monica. I'm just delighted to be here.
So let's get started. As I was reading this on the beach and on the plane, all I could think of was, holy cow, what an amazing childhood. And at what point did you realize this is book worthy? This is not an ordinary what everybody goes through. This is the stuff of novels and memoirs. I mean, what got you to say, okay, we're going to put pen to paper here?
I think I'm still realizing.
Uh-oh, I think.
Book worthy on a day-by-day basis.
So this is
my feeling.
Oh, I think you're back. So it's a great
okay?
follow-up to this very momentous answer. I think your computer froze. Oh, here we go. I think you're back.
I think my internet got a little thrown off. Can you hear me now?
I sure can.
Okay, great. Thank you.
When did you decide to put pen to paper?
Yeah, so I thought that my childhood was pretty ordinary, actually, and I've thought that, I think most children and people think that. But when I moved to the United States and quickly felt a need to learn English as fast as possible because it would throw off any suspicions about our immigration status, I started reading every book I could find in the public library. And back in the 90s, there were just not that many books about being an immigrant, and specifically being an undocumented immigrant. And I remember walking down East Broadway in Chinatown and telling my mother I didn't understand why we weren't represented anywhere on TV or in books, when I look around me and there were immigrants everywhere. And I just didn't understand why such an ordinary existence was not seen on the shelves. And she told me then the first time I said it, and every time I said it since, and as many times as I needed to hear it, that I would be someone who would share that part of the human experience. So she planted the seed very early on, and it was always kind of in the back of my mind, but I didn't feel the urgency and the importance of my story until I became a citizen in 2016, which was 22 years after I first moved here. And I became a citizen in May 2016 and finally received the privilege of being called an American citizen. I realized at that point how badly I had wanted to be called American, how much I loved this country, and how very rejected and abandoned I had felt by it for so long. And as the nation reeled into the 2016 election and the political rhetoric took a very sharp turn, villainizing immigrants, specifically undocumented immigrants, and in addition to that, people from China and Asian Americans, I felt that the stories that I had kept secret, kept invisible because of my undocumented status, no longer belonged to me, that I had a greater duty by virtue of my privilege of being American to share a part of my American experience, a part of the experience that so many millions of people in this country go through on some level, and yet is never held up to mass media or to literature. So that is what I strove to do. I felt, as I said, that in that time, under that particular political world, that my story had weight for the first time. But as I said earlier, I'm still learning about the ways in which people relate to my story. I am shocked time and again when people come up to me and say, you know, that story about not being able to afford Polly Pockets, or that story about finding your friends in the Babysitters Club at the public library shelves. Like, I had that same experience. And it's funny because when you're a kid, you assume that the circumstances of your life are ordinary and everyone's going through them, but you also assume that the particular shames that you carry and the embarrassments that you have are yours and yours alone, and that no one else can possibly understand because there's something singularly wrong with you. And it is through this dialogue with readers that I am learning there's something about childhood that is simply universal, and it goes beyond race and borders and immigration status. There's just something to the experience of being a human child that can still connect us in the heart.
Yeah, I mean, I ate up every word, in part because I did a story back maybe 10 years ago when I was at the Chicago Tribune, maybe 15 years ago. We were looking at women's migration and all different types of immigration and migration of women throughout the world. And so I was able to work with an agency to find a young woman who left Fujian and had to go through many safe houses around the world, and pay off snakeheads once she got to China. And we'd worked with her for a long time to get her story. And then we did a really stupid thing. The photographer, the Tribune photographer, and I went up to the sweatshop where she had been trying to pay off her fare to come over to the snakehead. And our photographer started taking pictures in the middle of the sweatshop. And a guy comes out and says, "What are you doing here?" And he grabbed her camera and he took out her disc. And at that time, discs were so expensive, and like the Tribune was going to kill us. It was like a $500 disc. And he said, he locked all the doors. And he said, "I'm going to call the police for trespassing." We're like, "Please call the police, please, just don't kill us." And in the end, and I feel awful, the woman we were going to write her story, she said, "I cannot do this. He's seen my face now. He's going to get my family now. I am done with this story. It's over." And I felt like, okay, we're idiots. We've exposed you. But now this story won't be told. People won't understand just how difficult it is for someone to get feet on the ground and then to be able to get an education or move out of the shadows or try to live a life where you can make a living wage without being exploited. We were able to sort of get around and tell some of the story, but I'm so glad you told this story because people just don't know. There are a lot of, I think, some Latin American immigration stories. I haven't seen this kind of story with Asian Americans, and it's so important. Like, what were some of the most important things you wanted people to know? I mean, just for me, like the scrambling for the jobs and getting these crappy jobs and these highly educated people having to take sewing jobs or, making sushi and freezing.
The number one thing I wanted people to not just know, but feel and live with me. I mean, I wrote this book really so people could open up a page and feel like they were stepping into my body. Just understand that more than anything, undocumented immigrants are humans with the same hopes and joys and love for America that citizens feel. And there's this whole, I guess, political line saying that, undocumented people come in and they just want to feed off Americans. And that shows me that whoever's saying that has never tried to actually help immigrants, because it's very hard to get immigrants to accept help. We are very proud. We come here to be self-sufficient. We come here to contribute, and we put ourselves last. Anyone from an immigrant family would know that. And the fact that we are vilified as something completely contrary to that just goes to show that some people have no idea how hard it is to be a new immigrant, a first-generation immigrant, and on top of that, an undocumented immigrant. So I wanted to bring to light what it's like to work in a sweatshop for 14 hours at a time for pennies per article of clothing, what it was like for my mother to stand in ice water all day long, what it was like to see her veins turn purple and her entire hand and skin turn purple, shaking, and remember so viscerally that she was once at the forefront of developing computer science, what it's like on a psychological level, what it's like on a physical level. Being undocumented doesn't just mean you're living without documents. It comes with a whole association of social struggles, of class struggles, of psychological and mental struggles that no human is equipped to withstand that. And why would parents risk such conditions if they were not determined to become contributing, well-meaning Americans who want to make this country better, who want to allow their children to make this country better?
One of the things that struck me was what a lifeline libraries were for you. And it just, I was thinking, Matilda, she is Matilda. Did you read the book Matilda, or were you like, holy cow, that's me?
Oh, absolutely. I watched the movie, I read the book. I didn't really think it was me. I don't know why. I mean, I understood I loved Miss Honey, and I had my own Miss Honey with Miss Peng, my third grade teacher, had these librarians who were so supportive of me. And yeah, I mean, there were so many little girls like that in books where even though they were of a different race or had a different background, I just felt so connected to them. Like Harriet the Spy was another one. She was always being mischievous and writing in her little diary, and I started writing in my diary, trying to solve some mystery around New York City. Yeah, when I moved here, I just felt overnight plucked from my safe community of friends and family. I had never longed for anything, growing up in China. I was pretty privileged, and overnight, everything was gone, everyone was gone, and I really wanted to fill that vacuum, that emptiness, and the safest people to fill that with were fictional characters, because then I could whisper to Matilda or Harriet that I was undocumented and it wasn't dangerous, right? And I could really be my full self with those fictional characters. So libraries save lives. I will say that 1,001 times, and librarians do not get nearly the recognition or support that they deserve. They are so much more than librarians. They are community leaders, they are teachers, they are counselors, and they love their patrons. I can feel it every time. I still go back to Chatham Square Library, and there's a librarian there who's still there from my years back there, and just they're pillars of the community, and they get so little recognition or reward for that. So to any librarians listening now, especially those in Chicago, I want to thank you for all that you do. I would not be here without people like you.
I mean, it's such a marker of a civilized society to have all these buildings that are about nothing but sharing information free and giving you beautiful stories free, as long as you remember to return them, which sometimes I forgot when I was a kid. It was like, oh, what am I going to do? Something that struck me in your book was this dichotomy between Cantonese speakers and Mandarin speakers, and how Chinatowns in the United States and really all over North America and much of the world were dominated by Cantonese speakers, people who came from the South, and that was the establishment. And but in China, Mandarin is known as the literary language, the language of Beijing, but it was all turned around here. Was that confusing for you and your family? It'd be like, what? She speaks Mandarin and the language of the land is Cantonese here.
It really felt like, I think I said it in a part in a book, it felt like the world was turned upside down. There's a lot of prejudice between South and North China, and people are often surprised by that. But when people voice surprise, I say, well, what do you think about the divide between North America and of our country and the southern states? I mean, it's very much kind of the same prejudices. And I had never met anyone from the South. I had no idea what people from Guangdong were like. And I was always told, we're fancy. We're right next to Beijing. We're just like Beijingers, and we speak Mandarin, and we're the educated. And I come here and I see, oh, these Cantonese people are not anything like what I was told. They're smart. They're sharp. I don't understand, because the whole time I was told that we were the smart and sharp ones, that they don't understand. And now they're running everything. They're running all the businesses. They're in control. And it took me a long time to understand and see through that divide, and also start to grasp that in America, what mattered more was solidarity within the Asian American community and within the Chinese American community. Because when you're in China, that solidarity doesn't really mean anything. But here it's the difference between finding the right school to go to where I felt safe, and the right libraries where I could speak to librarians who spoke Mandarin or Chinese, and feeling completely lost and alone in this continent.
I love the way you describe the world as a child sees it. You go to Manhattan, Chinatown one day, and like, the Americans look different here. They don't look like regular New Yorkers. And then, you realize you're talking about tourists. And when she speaks, it sounds like she's chewing on something. And that's, someone speaking Cantonese. You really capture the world of a child, and then the hunger of a child. I mean, do you think you'll ever forget what it's like to feel hungry all the time? I mean, I was feeling hungry just reading your book.
No, and to be very frank, despite all the privileges I have now, I still live in fear of not having enough to eat. I think once you've tasted a little bit of poverty, no matter what kind of poverty it might be, it stays with you. It stays in your bones, and it stays in your psyche. And I have trouble slowing down. I think a lot of women of color and immigrants can relate to this, that you feel that as long as you're working nonstop and working yourself to the bone, you can keep running. The minute you stop, it'll catch up with you. Other immigrant parents where they just can't sit still, and cooking, and I completely relate to that, because there is a piece of me deep down inside that is still that scared, hungry little girl, and she just wants to feel safe.
Oh, I think a lot of us have had grandparents who lived through the Depression and who said, do not waste that food. I know what it's like to be hungry. And it sounds like immigrants your age might also have those things that, really, I think today we would talk about as childhood traumas. I mean, I don't know if it's too personal to ask, have you been able to process those through any professional help? Because it sounds like, you dealt with a lot of childhood trauma.
I'm under the care of very good therapists.
Okay.
So when I started writing this book, I said I wanted to start at the election in 2016. So I remember sitting down after coming home from my law job at like 2 a.m. or something, and sitting in front of my computer very formally and saying, okay, I'm going to write this book with a capital B, very self-important. And I open up a Word document and I realize I can't write this book. And the reason I can't write it is because I never talked about those things. And because I hadn't talked about it or thought about it or processed it, there was nothing that could come out that was even worth reading. It was just gobbledygook. So I went into therapy and for the first time talked about those years, looked back on those years, cried over those years, screamed over those years, looked back on my copious diary entries where I was pretending to be Harriet the Spy, looked at photos, thought about the lack of photos because we were so poor that we didn't have a camera, and mourned all of the deprivations and the childhood that could have been that I still long for. It took me about 2 years before I felt even ready to start writing this book, because until it was processed and somewhat healed, I don't know that the story would have been worth reading and sharing. I think it would have been a very different accounting, because what I wanted to do with this book was to be extremely honest about myself, both my failings and some of the things that I did well, and be extremely honest about my parents, which was really difficult because I was only able to see them through childhood lens. And by the time I started writing this book, I was already older than they were during the events that this book recounts. So in therapy, I was able to see them anew as adults who were very young and trying very hard, but failing, as the people that they wanted to be, as the Americans that they dreamed that they would one day become, as the professors and professionals that they had left behind. There were so many versions of them, including the one that I know today, which is so different from the ones in the book. And to integrate all of that and really understand the motivations of my parents and see them as fully fleshed humans was something that, even if the book had not come out, had not been written, was something that fundamentally changed me and how I relate to them. I think it gave me a lot of healing because I spent a lot of years very angry at them. But I guess becoming an adult is being able to see your parents for all that they are. And the writing of this book gave me that opportunity.
I mean, I'm thinking it must have been difficult for so many reasons, and not a small one was that these were all secrets that, you know, you had to lock away. And so to like unpack them must have been like, there must have been a lot of fear. And yet you are so honest in there. You have all these poop incidents in there that some people are like, I'm not going to do that. But they're so revealing. I love how your dad's joke was that he would take a crap and then like, hey, go check something in the bathroom. And you'd be like, what? And he thought it was hilarious. I mean, it totally humanizes him. And I could see, you know, I know that my Asian American relative was like, oh, don't tell any secrets. And so like doubly hard is with older Asian Americans saying, guess what? I'm going to tell all the secrets. Was that tough?
Oh, absolutely. I would say it was even triply hard for me because my father's core trauma is that his brother was a dissident writer, and my father actually comes from a line of dissident writers. So he has all of these early life memories of being persecuted, both himself and his parents, for his brother's writing. And his brother was thrown into prison and starved and tortured for writing something, just writing an essay, nothing more than that. So I think particularly in my household, there was this messaging of what you say is very dangerous. Like words and stories have power. And the flip side of that is that it is very dangerous. They're powerful enough to get you deported. They're powerful enough to get you imprisoned. So I found that once I started thinking about my parents in the course of writing, I just couldn't write anymore. I just didn't know how I could do it to my father in particular, because this is not just my story. It's also their story. And the level of detail that I wanted to share, the honesty that I wanted to share, I knew that I either had to do it all in or not at all. And so when I paused to think about it, I would just freeze up. So I tricked myself into writing this book. And so I wrote this book on my subway commute on my iPhone because I was so short on time, and because the act of sitting in front of a computer, typing very formally, got into my mind that this might be a book, and that would really stress out my father. So I started writing on my notes app on my phone. And in doing that, I just kept telling myself, this isn't a book. There's no way this is a book. Who writes a book on a phone, right? This is a notes app where you make grocery lists and reminders, right? This is not, no one's going to see this. And so I am safe being as honest as I want. And shockingly, over the course of months, a book was completed. And at that point I said, it's okay, I'll go back and delete all of the scenes that would be problematic for my father to know is out there. And then as I was reading the first draft, I realized I couldn't do that because then the book would be 2 pages long. So I had to follow at that point my artistic instincts. And I also had to think about all of the communities, both Asian and undocumented, who are still living out there in enforced invisibility, and understand that my duty was a bigger one to them than to my father. And just hope that he loved me enough and was a forgiving enough person to understand. And thankfully, I have found that understanding and acceptance and forgiveness, although it was very scary and stressful at many points.
So he's read it.
He has, yes.
I was very mad at him for what he did to Marilyn, but I
A
also
lot of
see,
people are.
and for those who haven't read it, the cat, because he got very angry at the cat. But I also was able to see him as a fully formed human being, which, yeah, I mean, we're all flawed people. So you are doing workaround advocacy and civil rights now. Can you talk to me about that?
Sure. I have a firm with my husband. We mostly focus on educational civil rights, so making sure that immigrant children and children with disabilities are receiving the educational supports they need in the classroom, whether that's making sure that the public school boards provide that support, or placing these students in private schools and suing the public schools for the cost of that tuition. And I have to say that it's been a very long journey for me to get here. I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer at age 8 and knew that I wanted to go into public interest, but until I healed a big part of myself, and healing is continuous and ongoing, but until I healed a sizable part of those childhood wounds, every time I tried to do this kind of work, I just felt myself getting very frustrated and emotional because I did not get the educational supports I needed. Often and early in my time in New York, instead of being placed in a supportive English as a second language environment, I was placed in a special needs classroom that did not meet my particular needs. And it was very much sink or swim. And seeing how schools are run now, while some things have changed on the margins, the systemic issues at the core are still very much there. But because I have been fortunate enough to heal a part of me, I find that I'm able to go in there a much better advocate than I could have been before, because now it's not about me, it's about these children that I spend a lot of my time representing. So I think of it as the very least I can do with my law degree. And one would be hard pressed to spend time with children and not come out renewed with hope and joy for the future of this country. And I know that's a particularly difficult statement to make this week in our country, but I do believe that our future lies in the hands and hearts of our children, and we have to do absolutely everything we can to support them and protect them.
Yeah, the tragedy in Uvalde is just unspeakable, and you know, as the stories of these children come out, it's going to even get worse. And I believe it was in Texas where the governor was considering not spending public dollars on educating undocumented children. How do those particular stories hit you, where education was so key for you, and if they'd taken it away from children who weren't documented?
Yeah, I mean, I previously said it's set out as a constitutional right, as a Supreme Court decision, that all children are entitled to a free public education. But there have been many rights set out in the Supreme Court decisions that have recently been walked back on. So it doesn't surprise me that this is a frontier, a newly emerging frontier. But even when I was watching the coverage in Uvalde and I saw that Border Patrol officials were on site, that ICE was on site with these parents, and I didn't know how many of those parents might have been struggling with immigration status. I just can't imagine having to deal with that on top of the fear that your child has been shot to death in school. And I think political discourse so often elides all of the pressures on the shoulders of immigrant parents. They're juggling so much, the ability to pay the rent with limited low-paying jobs, making sure that your child is safe in school, making sure that your child is not captured, detained, or deported, making sure that you yourself is safe and are not captured, detained, or deported, getting medical care, feeling safe enough to get medical care, finding the courage to seek out public resources like free meals, knowing that it may lead to your deportation. So to add on top of that, is my internet okay? Can you hear me? I just got it. Okay. So to add on top of that, depriving these children of education that could possibly pull them out of certain social economic classes and struggles is, to me, unthinkable. It's inhumane. It's unjust. But again, we see so much of that happening across the country. So for me growing up, it was clear that education was my way out. And I was fortunate to have been born to educated parents who were educated before they moved here. I can't imagine what my life would have been like if I didn't have that one particular privilege. I believe that education should be affordable to all people in our country, certainly, because it is the social ladder on which we can climb out. But I also question why there is a social ladder at all, why there isn't more equity to begin with, that children don't have to fight to get into good schools and then take on loans and work, as I did, 40 hours a week throughout college, just for hope of making a living wage to support not just themselves, but their entire families. So yeah, education, I think, is on the frontier of eroding systemic injustice. But because of that, that's why we're seeing a lot of pushback on access to education, on anti quote unquote CRT books, which are not at all related to critical race theory. And it's an ongoing battle, but I'm privileged to be able to take some small part in that fight.
We got a question, and it says, the book really resonated with me because it was such a millennial undocumented perspective and the influence of pop culture. How did it feel revisiting all those pop culture influences throughout the writing? And do you think that it's distinct for the millennial generation? So like Polly Pocket's Babysitter Club.
Yeah, I think it probably is distinct. There's a certain uniqueness to 90s culture. I think it was so much fun for me to go back and look back on it. I actually, while fact checking, especially about the Polly Pockets, I started Googling the olds, because there are new Polly Pockets that don't quite look, they're not the same. But I was trying to find what are now called vintage Polly Pockets. And for some reason during the pandemic, there was a surge on the vintage Polly Pockets. So I found some on eBay, but they were going for like thousands of dollars. So I think that there's a particular nostalgia that people of a certain age associate with those things, and to look back and think about how badly I long for a Furby, which nobody really thinks about anymore, or the G-Shock watches. That Babysitter's Club is now a Netflix show. I mean, there were so many joys in addition to heartaches in writing my book, but that was a central one, just being able to go back and revisit all of that. I did create a 90s playlist for this book. You can look it up on Spotify. It's called Beautiful Country 90s Playlist. I had so much fun. I was only going to put 10 songs on there. There's probably something like 80 songs. I still love the Backstreet Boys. I still listen, they're my default to this day. Selena was a big one. I have so many of her songs on there. So yeah, it felt like time traveling, and I really enjoyed it.
That's so great. Are there any stories you debated whether or not you should include?
Oh, absolutely. On a certain level, all of them. On a certain level, I still wake up today thinking this book is out there now. I can't take it back. Like my childhood's just out there. But particularly some of the very honest scenes with my father. I really wanted him to be humanized. I wanted people to love him, but I also wanted to tell the truth about him. I also think that there's a lot of domestic violence and anger among Asian American men that manifest because they are so forcibly emasculated in American culture. And it manifests in just about, I can think of so many Asian American households that deal with similar issues, but we can't talk about it, right? It's not safe, or we don't want to air our dirty laundry. We have to keep our head down. And I really wanted to hold up to the world some examples of what being an Asian American man, being treated like half a man, as my father said, can do to somebody who lives to fight for his wife and daughter, somebody who had grand dreams of what America could do for his daughter, of the freedoms and the joys, and the slow erosion of that, of his identity and who he felt himself to be. And so I wanted to do my father justice in that vein too. So I know that he's not thrilled that those stories are out there, but he also said upon reading my book that in reading it, he felt like he was watching a movie with him in it, but he realized that he had only remembered the bad that he had done. He had forgotten the good things. And so in a way, reading this book healed him and gave him amnesty and solace and forgiveness over some of the things that he could not forgive himself over. And that to me spoke worlds of how he's grown, how much he's come to accept my difficult decisions, but also how much guilt and shame he bared for so many decades.
Speaking of movie, I would be surprised if you haven't gotten some interest in sort of optioning it.
I have had some interest. My hesitation with selling my life rights is that I'm still very young. This book only covers 5 years, and I wanted it very much to be an honest and dimensional accounting and not shoehorned into the American dream narrative that is so easy to try to sell and package it into. So my focus is on having a movie done the right way, rather than the fastest or biggest way, because I would not want fellow undocumented immigrants, fellow Asian immigrants to watch this movie and say, that's not representative, that's not accurate, that's not authentic. And so I feel a great burden and responsibility to make sure that it's done right first and foremost.
So you're going to be careful about who does it and how it's done. Okay. We got another question saying, starting the story on the phone is a good idea. Do you have any other tips for people who want to get started in writing?
Yeah, I would say anything you can do to eliminate the filters in your head is paramount. I think the biggest struggle in writing is not actually writing. It's actually letting yourself write. Whatever comes to you, just deeming it worthy to put it down, because that's my biggest struggle. Every sentence that came to me, I just thought, you think that that's a worthwhile sentence? You think people will want to read this? Who do you think you are, that you can write a book you know nothing about? There are all these voices that are inside all of us telling us we can't do it. And with any artistic endeavor, whether that's painting or playing the piano or writing, there is that hurdle of self-doubt and censorship that we have to battle first and foremost. So for me, it came with writing on the phone, because I'm just like, this is silly. There's no way that one writes a book on the phone, especially because I have no idea what it takes to write a book. And it can come from, this is something I've been trying recently, is waking up and writing right away, because my thinking mind, my critical mind, my lawyering mind has not yet woken up. And so you're more able to pour it out that way. And I think Ernest Hemingway, said to write drunk and edit sober. I'm unfortunately allergic to alcohol, so that wasn't available to me, but whatever you got to do to get the writing out there, I think it is a good one. So I hope that those 3 examples, very different, might get you started on what might work for you.
Yeah, you do need to have this big dose of hubris or courage to think, why would anyone want to write it? Which is why I think you see so many white male writers, because I think, well, especially women of color and women and Asian women were like, oh, who'd want to hear from me? And just getting over that hurdle is so big. Okay, so this ends, the family's going to Canada. I'm assuming there's a sequel coming out. Are you working on it?
I'm not working on it yet. I actually wasn't thinking of writing one when I was working on
Leave us
Beautiful.
hanging like that.
Yeah. But I have gotten so many readers saying, where's the next volume? Thinking about, because initially I was just thinking that this is a book not about me, but about the new immigrant experience, about the undocumented immigrant experience, about the two sides of America and how they come together to ruin and build up lives. And it wasn't about me at all, but now it seems that people want to hear about me, which takes another layer of hubris to be like, oh, I'm just going to write about my life. So I think I need some time to process what happened after, and a lot of things did happen after, and frame it into, I guess, a message or package or vehicle that I find societally important, in addition to just being about my life, because I don't think just recounting my days is that interesting.
Well, there's a big leap between heading for the Canadian border and Yale Law School, and I think everyone's kind of trying to figure out how that dream came true. So what are you thinking, in a few years that might come out?
Yeah, I mean, I started working on one novel, and then I got an idea for another novel that like grabbed me, and that's the one I'm working on now. So I guess I have 2 novels going, and maybe after that I'll turn back to a second memoir. But yeah, I'm sorry?
You're going fiction.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
fiction has, those who've read my book know fiction has always held my heart. I love literature. I love novels. That's really where my literary heart lies. So I want to see if I can do it. And every day now, when I'm trying to see if I can do it, I tell myself, you can't do it. You have no idea how to write fiction. But that was the same dialogue I had writing this memoir. So I'm hopeful that might mean that I'm on the right path.
So easier to write fiction or nonfiction? Well, especially when the nonfiction is your life and your big secrets.
They're different in different ways. For nonfiction, for me, the hard part was distancing myself enough to present a processed and full image. For fiction, it's that there are so many choices that you can make, and every choice feels so important. Whereas with my memoir, I couldn't choose how many people were in my story and who they were, right? That was bounded by the facts of life. And now the world is open and out there, but fiction also feels to me more liberating and more fun because it's not as emotionally raw, although I think it's emotional in a very different way.
And some people don't like to talk about the book they're working on, but could you say genre, time period?
Yeah. So I started writing a contemporary novel about Asian Americans working in corporate law. Not my follow-up memoir, just inspired by my adult life. But then I was looking at some history books, and I fell in love with this idea of a book about the gangs of Chinatown, particularly when they started to spring up under the Chinese Exclusion Act, and how those gangs evolved first as a means of keeping the community protected, but then gradually became also a means of exploiting the community and interrogating toxic masculinity when at intersection with racism, and particularly the emasculation that Asian Americans men face that I mentioned earlier. So there are a lot of complex layers to it. I'm doing a lot of research. Again, don't know that I can write a historical novel, but this is the idea that feels big and important to me right now. And it's kind of a similar feeling to what I felt when I started working on this memoir. So again, I'm hoping that itself will propel me to keep working on it.
Well, we have to talk because actually I've written and researched a bit about this because my family, there was a big murder in 37. We were neither Hip Sing nor On Leong, but we decided to open up a restaurant around the corner from, so On Leong and Hip Sing were the two big gangs. And we opened up a restaurant around the corner from an On Leong member. They said, they went to their boss and said, hey, this guy opened up this restaurant. You're not supposed to open it up within a mile. That was the rule outside of Chinatown. 1 mile is the distance. So he told the killer to go get my grandpa. My great uncle was there. He said, hello, uncle, bang, bang, killed him. And then according to the newspapers, he said, now where's Harry? I am going to kill him next. And someone told my grandfather, who was at another restaurant, get out. They're coming to get you. He left. And then the story, as we're bowing at the grave of my great uncle, stories, and okay, and then they didn't get him. And like, they're not just going to give up. The On Leong isn't going to just not kill him. And so finally I found out we had to pay $50,000 in 1937 to the On Leong and join them to not get murdered.
Oh my goodness.
But you're right. The association started as social service agencies to fill a vacuum that, the government wasn't filling. I mean, law, loans, education, and they did become exploitative and, criminals of their own. Anyway, we'll talk about that offline.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a lot of stories for me. I'm so sorry your family went through that, but also,
it was, I mean, but again, I had to like pull it out of people because Chinese American families, Asian American families, a lot of families, they don't want to tell the secrets. They're like, just shut up about the secrets. Yeah, we all got along. It was all great. There was no, crime. There was nothing. And, that's not true. Okay, another question. And Mariela, can you remind me when we're going to have to wrap this up? Do you have recommendations for other books or organizations that people should seek out in understanding the undocumented experience? Great question.
One organization I love is Make the Road in New York. They're amazing. During the pandemic, they really spearheaded the Fund Excluded Workers Act because while documented Americans were able to get a lot of relief and support, undocumented Americans who were on the front lines, who were working in hospitals and at restaurant delivery, were not getting any support. And their children were home alone, often without internet or without the ability to procure food. So Make the Road, which really seeks to champion the rights of undocumented Americans, saw that this was a huge gap in the legislation and worked to advocate for a fund that supported a lot of the undocumented workers that kept our economy and society going during the pandemic. So please look them up. For books, The Undocumented Americans by Carla Villavicencio Cornejo is a searing, it's mixed memoir, essay, and investigative interviews of the undocumented experience. She particularly wanted to reject the idea that only dreamers, only people who came here as children on undocumented status were worthy. She wanted to look at the adults who chose to came here, the adults who are the pillars of our communities, who aren't looked at, blue collar workers across America. She traveled across the country to interview and meet with these incredible people. So I would really recommend that. Jose Vargas has written Dear America, Notes from an Undocumented Citizen, I believe is the full title. He came out with his essay in the New York Times, I believe, when I was a 2L in law school. And he's revealed that he was undocumented, even though he was a Pulitzer-winning journalist, he was struggling with immigration status still. And I remember being in law school class, reading this article and thinking, if this person is so brave as to come out while still undocumented, what am I afraid of? I'm in law school. I, at that point, had a visa. I had enough to eat. I wasn't on the run. If he could do it, then what is stopping me? And he really, without Jose, I don't think that I would have written this book, because that was when the idea that my mother had planted in me started percolating again. And I started thinking that I owed it to a whole community of people out there to share my truths.
Well, on that note, Qian Julie Wang, author of Beautiful Country, thank you so much for talking to us today. What a wonderful book. I hope everyone out there who doesn't have it yet gets it, reads it, and has discussions about it. I'm so glad we got to discuss it with you. And thank you so much for talking to us today. Mariela, any wrapping up words we need?
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. That's all the time we have this evening. And I do want to thank Qian Julie for the incredible description of the work libraries hope to do to make this world a better place. With events like this, our story times, and definitely our books. The library is for everyone to read, learn, and discover. And my little librarian heart grew like 3 times this evening. Qian Julie's book is called Beautiful Country. You can check it out at the Chicago Public Library or any of your other local libraries. And we also encourage you to visit an independent bookstore to purchase a copy. Tonight's program will be available on Chicago Public Library's YouTube and Facebook page. If you have friends who weren't able to join us tonight, please invite them to watch it on demand. And please visit the Chicago Public Library website for many more upcoming virtual events at chipublib.org. Thank you, Qian Julie and Monica, and thanks to everyone for tuning in this evening. Have a great night and stay well.
Thanks.